Could or should the Pelicans build around Brandon Ingram? The answer is more obvious than you may think. Plus, more trade talk on today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Wednesday, and we are going to get into some Brandon Ingram trade talk, but we're also going to rank of Ingram, CJ McCollum, and Zion Williamson, the order in which you would want to try and trade those guys, which is the highest priority to the lowest right there. And then we're going to come up with an actual trade for you in the final segment of today's show. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. If you're an everydayer still, you get even more credit this year. Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And by the way, sign up for the Locked On Pelicans free daily newsletter over at lockedondaily.com. So let's get into this one. You know, I put out a call for questions on Twitter and y'all delivered. I actually have like a couple shows worth of like that I want to turn some of those questions into like a full 30-minute show. But we're going to kind of do a mix of things here because it kind of ties into a lot. And I got some variation of this question that I think is really, really good and worth exploring. And I think we also, to this, have a pretty obvious answer. And that is, could or even should the Pelicans build around Brandon Ingram? And thus this means maybe trading CJ McCollum, trading Zion Williamson. Let's call it at the very least trading Zion away or waiving him, whatever, getting rid of Zion and building around Brandon Ingram instead. After all, right? This is someone who is like kind of said, I want to be here. He likes being here. Can you just build around, kind of pivot to making him the focal point in doing that? And the long and short of this answer is no. I get where people are coming from with this question and feeling maybe you could, but I think one thing we've definitely seen is that Ingram isn't a #1 guy. Look, it's debatable if Zion's a #1 guy. And so if Ingram isn't the #1 guy, can you really say they're building around him? Can you really commit to him at the money that he wants? And we'll get into that in a second here. But I think the easiest answer is if Ingram's not the #1 guy, can you actually build around him? And I think the answer to that is no. Look, it's tough. It's tough just in general to build around someone who doesn't want to take threes. And look, his threes are up. For the 18 games that he's played this season, he's taking 6.4 per game. That is the most he's ever taken in his career. That's a really good number, and you've got to give him a lot of credit for really trying to kind of commit to that more. But it's only 18 games of that, and you have, about 100 games, more than that, going back the past 2 years, just that alone, you have about 200 games kind of showing maybe he isn't like the volume three-point threat that you need. It's just tough to build around someone that doesn't shoot threes, let alone two of them. That's part of the problem with Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. And I know this is going to upset Brandon Ingram fans, and I get it. But I think we've seen, and I've seen a lot of the Brandon Ingram fans just be like, yeah, he's not a #1 option. He's a 2 or a 3 at best option. And if we agree with that, you're not really building around him. He's still going to be miscast. And at times, the shot profile still leaves so much to be desired. And that's why the Pelicans were looking at moving him this offseason. If they are committed to building around Zion, the fit just isn't there. I think we can safely say that at this point. So you're going to still run into some of these problems, I think, trying to build around him, particularly if he's not the #1 guy, and the shot profile. The other thing is, if you're committing to building around him, it's going to be that $200 million deal or something that he wants, that extension. And look, if there was a team that really thought Brandon Ingram's worthy of $50+ million on average, he would have it by now. But I don't think there are teams that really think that, really feel that. And his market thus is set lower. But I don't know if that's going to end up being in New Orleans. Just if they're not going to give him the contract he wants, he might take less money and go elsewhere, partially out of spite. And I get that too. So if you're committed to building around him, you're going to be committing $50-something million to him. I think it was a $208 million extension that he was eligible for. And that just feels like too much money for him. $40 million for him? Sure. When you get into 50 plus, I think that's where rightfully the team and other teams, and I would get nervous when it comes to that. We don't know if the team will ever pay the luxury tax. Now, they've never really been in position. I was thinking about this the other day. They've never really been in position to actually be in the luxury tax. And maybe that's a show for a separate day. If you go look back at some of the rosters, there was never a year where it's they should stay in the tax and go forward and not kind of dump a player. There's never been a year where you would actually think that looking at the roster and looking at the results of the team. So, if they would one day pay the luxury tax, you're going to have to with Ingram as your centerpiece, and that just doesn't seem right. And look, Ingram's faults and things like that in terms of on-court stuff, it's definitely impacted by the rest of the roster, by Zion not being available too. That is absolutely a factor into it. But Ingram also is not the most reliable guy. He's played over 70 games once in his NBA career, and that was his rookie year when he played 79 games. Since then, it's 59, it's 52, it's 62, which was the COVID-shortened year. That number was good. Even he was an all-star his first year here. Next year, 61, COVID-shortened year too, but then 55, 45 2 years ago, and 64 last season. 64 is not bad. I'll admit that here. But overall, it just doesn't feel like you can rely on him as much as you would like. A lot of, Zion has missed more time and things like that, but Ingram has missed a lot of time as well. And can you actually commit to that guy? Is he going to show up on the nightly basis that you need him to do? And that is still a valid question right now, I think. And so that kind of adds to it. Look, the stats and the counting stats, all that are really good. I think he's gotten better defensively here in New Orleans. So I could commit to him being the number 2 guy, the number 3 guy on a team at $40 million, but that's not the same as building around Ingram. And if you're choosing him or Zion, and essentially that's the question, right? Which one should they build around? I think there's higher upside for Zion. I think there's risk with both of them, more risk with Zion, but higher upside potentially with Zion Williamson. So if you're forced to choose between the two, I'd still pick Zion. Longer team control on a better contract than what Ingram will get, and that's a factor into it as well. So I don't think they should build around Ingram, commit to Brandon Ingram as the number 1 guy. In other capacity, yes, absolutely. And we'll get more into that in the next segment here. Because just because I don't think you should commit to building around with Ingram as the focal point, I don't necessarily that means he should be traded or not re-signed. And that's something that I have long said here. Let's look at that and let's kind of rank some things coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by my go-to ticketing app, Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is just that much better. And it's also kind of the perfect gift for this holiday season. Game Time is a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. And Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So Game Time Picks, that curation is going to make it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, and theater, not waste your time. And then they can have the all-in pricing. You toggle this up front, and it's going to show you the total amount, no surprise fees at checkout. And I love the panoramic views from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by Rocket Money. Rocket Money is going to help you save money. And around the holiday season, when you're trying to buy extra gifts, things like that, that's really important. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. So it's basically like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. And it brings it together all in one place, whether it's your subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when you're using all of the app's premium features. I like the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel other services that I wasn't anymore. That can always be difficult too, and they're going to make it even easier for you. Plus, with that goals feature, you're able to automatically set aside money for the future, so no more stressing about budgeting every month. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday. Y'all get extra credit if you're listening every single day. But there's a lot to talk about. And there's interesting discussions around this team, even if the season isn't going. And it allows for a lot more thoughtful discussions about hypotheticals and things that this team is and should be looking at in a way that we wouldn't if they were just winning tons of games. We'd be focused on that. So I actually kind of really like this time to think more in depth about the team and have other ideas of what it looks like with this franchise. And we got a lot of content to come. I've got some really great show ideas for y'all with it all. If you want even more Pelicans content, look, we got the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com, and start your day with the all new free Locked On Pelicans newsletter. So let's get into kind of looking at some of the guys on the team. And, it ties to the question we just had. Should you build around Brandon Ingram? Basically, it's saying you pick an Ingram or Zion. And I get the question. And it's probably going to anger some of y'all that I said still stick with Zion, because if you have to pick one of the two, that's what I'm doing, partially because of the contract. I think it might be easier to put a more complementary team around Zion with kind of the court gravity and things like that. Now, there's other big questions about Zion. The maturity and all that stuff, the injury history is right there too, and that's not great. But if we're kind of posing these type of questions, that's what I think right now. But I don't necessarily think Ingram needs to be traded. So let's look at let's look at Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum. Here's kind of the way that I prioritize trying to move them and why. So which one would I be trying to move first? Let's say it's you'll be able to find a deal that makes sense for both sides. You're not robbing any team. You're not trading CJ for 4 first-round picks or anything like that. What this means is I think you try and trade CJ McCollum first. Right now, the priority of the team is to just get under the luxury tax line this season, about $2 million or so over, and they want to get below that. You can do that simply with trading CJ McCollum and bringing back slightly less salary. I think that's the way you do it. The Pelicans, even if they duck the tax at $2 million this season by just doing a $2 million trade, are going to be in the same situation next year. And it's are you going to pay the luxury tax? Do you want to pay the luxury tax? Open question. We'll do a whole show on it, I promise. So you're going to need to kind of also address that. So while your first priority is getting under the tax this season, it's cleaning up your books a little bit for next season too. And the everydayers kind of know the cap situation for New Orleans. We've looked at it. Even if you let Ingram walk for nothing, it doesn't mean you're going to really be able to do much. So you want to find a $10 million expiring contract. You want to shave about $2 million off right now in a trade and find a $10 to $20 million contract that's expiring. That's ideal for New Orleans. That fixes the salary cap situation this year and next year. And I think that's easiest to do with CJ McCollum because he is under contract for one more year. You don't need to worry about committing long-term money to him like you would with Brandon Ingram. So I think of the 3 guys, maybe you could get more in return for Ingram, maybe, but I think CJ might be the easiest to move. And we've heard rumors that, there was teams sniffing around CJ McCollum, seeing what it would take. So of those 3, the one that I try and trade away right now is CJ McCollum because I think it addresses the cap this year and next year too. And I think that could really work. He's not probably going to be on the team beyond this contract. So in a sense, you're ripping the Band-Aid off a year early and then moving on from him. And if you do that, it does open the potential for a 1-in-1 deal for Brandon Ingram. So a 2-year contract where the second year is a player option. So it's kind of the prove it deal. You get 1 year here to go and earn a big time contract. You can opt out, or if you get hurt or it doesn't go the way you want, at least you have that guaranteed other year that you can opt into in the financial security, knowing that it's going to be $40+ million. That's not ideal for what Ingram wants, but I think it's a compromise here that makes a lot of sense. So that's the route that it'll allow you to do. We've heard the reporting right now that if Ingram wants an extension at his current contract, $36 million, they're not really in position to offer it to him because they're then deep into the luxury tax again next year, and they're going to have to make more maneuvering. So get rid of CJ, have some of that money fall off the books. Not all of it. You won't get, $36 million in expiring or anything like that, but do that and get some money falling off the books, and it opens the door to re-signing Brandon Ingram on some sort of contract. Now, you're not necessarily re-signing him because you believe in him and Zion Williamson together, right? Like, certainly, I think we've seen the answer to that is just no, for a variety of different reasons that has to do with both players. But it does buy you time, and that can be an important thing too. It means you don't have to trade Brandon Ingram for pennies on the dollar, and that's kind of what you're looking at. The offers for him weren't great this offseason. They're only lower now. And if that's going to be the case, this at least lets them kind of kick the can down the road and try and address this later and figure out what they want to do with him, or maybe get a little bit more of a return or get more in a sign and trade or something like that, without then that still messing up your books. So my priority is to move CJ McCollum. After that, it's to trade Brandon Ingram. Say you exhaust all CJ McCollum options. Then, unfortunately, it comes down to trading Brandon Ingram. And we'll look at a trade for him in the next segment here on Locked On Pelicans with the San Antonio Spurs. I think there is a deal out there that would make sense with the Spurs. And I think there's some team that as we get closer to the trade deadline, go, when he comes back healthy, that's a real big upgrade for us. We're in a good position. We know who we are as a team. That's the missing piece. And maybe some teams don't realize that yet, whether it's the Houston Rockets, whether it's the Oklahoma City Thunder, San Antonio Spurs, or a couple of other teams that we will look at throughout the next week or so. I think you'll start to see his market get a little bit warmer, but I don't think it'll get that much warmer. So you're basically giving up on him for nothing. That Houston Rockets trade we looked at last year is more about just parts to maybe flip to get something else. So in the aggregate, you kind of get a bunch for Brandon Ingram when you won't get that from just one team. Not an ideal situation. But that's only the route I would go after exhausting all options with CJ McCollum. I would then try and re-sign Ingram to a 1-in-1 deal or a 2-in-1, whatever it might be, something along those lines. Bring him back, and then maybe you try and trade him again next year. Or maybe now that he's under contract for one more year, you can move him in the middle of the season or in the offseason, whatever it might look like. And I think that could be an option for New Orleans to manage their assets better than maybe they have so far. So CJ McCollum first, Brandon Ingram second, and then Zion Williamson third when it comes to this. And right now, look, I'm off on a lot of the Zion hype and things like that. I think that's obvious because it just hasn't worked out in that way. But he is under team contract on a deal that's not too bad, all things considered, with opt-outs if there's a way you want to go that. Now, they're not going to waive him. That would be kind of silly in my opinion. If you could get 2 second-round picks for him, you should at least do that. But he's going to make under $40 million next year, 42 after that, then 44.8 the year after that, and 27-28. That's not a bad deal for a player of what his potential is, in my opinion. So you hope that, this will be a wake-up call. That, look, bad publicity around him, you would hope is getting to him, but at 24 years old, he's just entering his prime. Maybe it's a big maybe, if he puts things together, you start to feel pretty good about what he would be able to do for this team and what you could build around him. Because when he's looked really good, he looks like a very special player. But it hasn't worked out. But at least then you can get out of that deal. If you give Ingram a 4 or 5 year deal and all of a sudden he's just the same player, that's tougher to get out of in the future, especially if it's for like max money. At least Zion's, you have those outs on. And that's why I kind of put him in that order. Let me know what the order you have. Is it CJ, Ingram, Zion? Do you agree? Is it Ingram and Zion as 1A and 1B? Or 1A and 1B, whatever it might be. Let me know how you would rank those guys in the comments down below. So coming up next, I do have a specific trade with the San Antonio Spurs. I'll explain it. I think it makes sense for both teams. Let's break that down. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to take on all the NFL and NBA action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL and NBA all in one place. Those lines are always updating. Just because the game has started doesn't mean that you're done betting. You can get in on the updated lines as you see momentum and things changing throughout the game. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, don't waste it. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And all you have to do is just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And that's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is also brought to you by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks and it's completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no extra cost. And then you can redeem points for flights, hotel stays, even future rent payments with over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program. The possibilities are endless. Access unique experience that are exclusive to Built members as well. Look, I like using points for travel, for hotels, things like that. And Built makes it easy to turn your rent into rewards. So if you're already paying rent, why not make it work for you? So start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com. That's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNBA. That's joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA to make sure to use our link so they know we sent you. Don't wait. Start earning rewards today. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. A lot of trade talk in these days between games. We're going to have Will Guillory on the show tomorrow from The Athletic, joining me to break down what's the rest of the season hold. If you got questions for Will, put them in the comments down below. Are there rankings we want to do for any players? He really wanted to last time he was on the show, we talked about like small forwards, shooting guards for the team because we wanted to figure out where to kind of like put each one more in. Each one, by the way, is a scout for the Chicago Bulls, so he'd been spending a lot of time here in New Orleans scouting out this team and some of the opponents, which was kind of cool to see him back in the building. But is there another position? Is there another player that you have a question? That'd be a good one. I will keep an eye on the comments. Give me, I don't want to say like an obscure player. Don't get too obscure because that doesn't help, and we're going to be like, no, we're not going to do that. But someone who played like decent minutes for the team that, you know, it's like, are they like kind of an all-time Pelican? Not an all-time Pelican? Where do they kind of fit? We can have some fun with it with Will Guillory on the show from The Athletic tomorrow. I'm excited to have him on. He's always great on here. So for your second listen today, by the way, I saw Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints today at a luncheon, and that was really cool. And he was great. He's killing it over at Locked On Saints, having some really good chat about Spencer Rattler and Darren Rizzi and how fun Darren Rizzi is as a head coach. All of that over at the Locked On Saints podcast for everything black and gold, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make them your second listen today. So let's keep talking trades here. And I've got a trade with the San Antonio Spurs that I do think makes sense for New Orleans and actually is a pretty decent return, in my opinion, here for them. So here's the deal. We can talk picks too in this. You'd like one, but I don't think you're going to really get it. The Pelicans send out Brandon Ingram and Daniel Tice, and in return, they get Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones, and Malachi Branham. And you could take out Branham and put like Charles Bassey in after he torched New Orleans if you really wanted kind of a different type of player or someone in there. I think that makes sense for this team. But that's essentially the basis of the trade. So here's why I don't hate this. Keldon Johnson is a rotation player, 13 points per game this season. You know, he takes threes. He doesn't make threes. That's not bad, but he's on a decent enough contract, in my opinion, that I don't think he's like untradeable. He's currently hurt, so that like kind of fits into the Pelicans too. You know, at times he's been an okay 3-point shooter, but again, he's willing to take that there. Maybe in New Orleans that gets a little bit better. He's making $19 million this year, $17.5 million next year, and then $17.5 million in 2026, 2027. So it's a reasonable contract that you could package later and move. You get Trey Jones on an expiring deal, $9 million this year. So that's where some of the salary cap relief comes in. And then you get Malachi Branham, who, is a first-round pick from a couple of years ago, is still very young at age 21 and has some scoring potential, even if he hasn't put it really together and kind of has regressed a little bit at the NBA level, though his role has really shifted this year from the past couple with the San Antonio Spurs. But there were people who thought he should have been a lottery pick in that draft, and he ended up going 20th overall out of Ohio State. So that's kind of the deal. Maybe there's a lottery protected first in there or something along those lines. But look at the San Antonio Spurs right now. This is a team that is fighting for a play-in spot in the Western Conference and is very, very close to it. They're currently sitting 11th in the West at 13-13, just a game behind the Los Angeles Lakers, who are at 10. You had Brandon Ingram onto the San Antonio Spurs, and I do think that really improves them and probably makes them solidifying their spot in the play-in tournament. The issues with them are both offense and defense. They need a boost in one of those areas. You have a guy like Jeremy Sohan, who I would love to get back in the trade, but I don't think he makes a ton of sense on New Orleans, actually. And, he might get booted out of the starting lineup for the San Antonio Spurs. But his offense hasn't been there. His defense is good. That boosts them up in there, and they're not a great defensive team with Sohan in, even though he was hurt for part of the year. So they get that extra scoring oomph punch that they probably need. You don't waste a year of Victor Wembanyama because, look, they're good enough to compete right now. Wemby is like the truth here, it really feels like. You add Brandon Ingram onto that team where he doesn't need to necessarily be the man, can probably get room for mid-range and all of that. I think it makes a ton of sense for them for what they're trying to do. New Orleans gets an intriguing young player, Malachi Branham, a rotation piece in Keldon Johnson, and salary cap relief in Trey Jones. That's kind of what you're looking for in a Brandon Ingram trade. You'd like those three things: salary cap relief, a playable guy, and maybe someone with some upside or a draft pick or both. But I don't know if you're necessarily going to get both. It would hurt to probably see Brandon Ingram on the San Antonio Spurs, particularly succeeding next to Victor Wembanyama. I mean, their future looks bright with Wemby there. It doesn't, while I think it would be smart for them to be bad this year too, it doesn't look like they're going to be able to do that, barring shutting Victor Wembanyama down. And look, defensively, he makes them so much better, cleans up a whole lot, so you can kind of get away with maybe some subpar defense from Brandon Ingram if that's the case. I think it makes sense for New Orleans. I don't know if it makes sense for the Spurs too. I just don't see them doing this sort of thing, I think, is my biggest thing. It's really tough to find a Brandon Ingram trade, but that's kind of the best one that I have with the San Antonio Spurs. What do you think? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Let me know in the comments down below. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Will Guillory on the show tomorrow. We'll break down more about this season, trade talk, what he's hearing. There's some things. It's coming up in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. We'll recap the game on Friday after the game against the Houston Rockets. You want a tease for Monday's show, depending on how the weekend goes. I'll tell you why they might not fire Willie Green or David Griffin this season. Why you don't do that in particular. I want to break that down for you on Monday's episode. We're going to do a Grizzlies trade focus show because there's a player on the Grizzlies that I really like and would like in New Orleans. We got a whole lot more to come here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.